Hey, Allison.
Hi, Dr. Ganadev. How are you?
Okay, Ash
Okay.
was, Ash was struggling with the Zoom link was and then came through. So,
Yeah. I talked to her this morning too about your situation this weekend. No problem.
um,
We're ready.
Perfect. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm Dr. Tak Mokatash, President of the San Bernardino County Medical Society. We're honored truly to have Congressman Jay Obernolte of the 23rd Congressional District in California, including our San Bernardino County High Desert and Big Bear areas, with us today to talk about artificial intelligence in healthcare and what it means for physicians. Congressman Obernolte is a congressional leader on artificial intelligence and currently the only serving member of Congress with a graduate level degree in artificial intelligence. He chairs the House's task force on AI and serves on the House Committee on Energy and and the Commerce Subcommittee on Health. In addition, he chairs the Science, Space, and Technology Subcommittee on Investigations and Oversight. Additionally, we want to thank Congressman Obernolte for his steadfast support of physicians and access to care. Congressman Obernolte, we want to thank you for fighting to stop our entire Medicare payment cut. Unfortunately, Congress only stopped half the physician Medicare cut in the appropriations vote on Wednesday, but we wanted to show you that we appreciate your support. This is a rare opportunity to learn from one of the nation's most respected experts on AI and healthcare in our evolving technological and regulatory landscape. Quickly, we want to remind everyone that today's session is being recorded, and in case there is time, we will try to pull some questions from the chat feature on Zoom. So please enter your questions there. Congressman, I'll turn it over to you.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much. It's great to see everyone, if only virtually, but it's really an honor to be here speaking before you again. So I wanted to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence and what's happening in the House and the impact I think that might have on healthcare in the United States here over the next 20 years or so. So as was mentioned, we have a brand new House task force on artificial intelligence. I'm really happy that finally we've gotten going on that. It has taken a year of pushing to finally get that organized, and I'm very honored to have been entrusted with the chairmanship of that task force. This is a subject that is incredibly near and dear to my heart. This is a little known fact about me that I never set out to be in public office or even in business. My original plan was I wanted to be a researcher in artificial intelligence. So I went to Caltech, got an undergraduate degree in computer engineering, and I was working on my doctorate in artificial intelligence at UCLA, doing some of the very early research on natural language processing and computer vision, when my side hustle at the time, which was writing video game software, took off. And I just did that to put myself through graduate school, but never expected to be doing it for a living. But when it really took off, it kind of became clear that was another path for me. And so that deflected me out of academia and into business. And I spent 30 years running a video game development studio. But it all started with AI. So from my point of view, the development of AI has been very incremental. I know with the advent of large language model driven products like ChatGPT and Gemini, that it's suddenly very obvious to everybody that it's going to have a huge impact on our society and our economy. But from my standpoint, this has been something that's been 5 decades in the making. So it's really an honor for me to be entrusted with the job of the task force. So the rule that we've been given is to, over the next 9 months or so, craft a regulatory framework for AI. And I think that when you set out to regulate something, it's very important that you have a North Star to guide you in why you're trying to regulate. If you don't understand why you're regulating, then you're just regulating for the purpose of regulation, which I think is a fool's errand. So to me, the North Star has to be government's obligation to mitigate the harmful effects of AI on our economy and our society. I think that government has a very important role to play in mitigating some of those effects, as particularly as it concerns the potential malicious use of AI. And that's where I think we should focus our efforts, because I think once you've determined what are all of the things that you need to mitigate, then that kind of forms a to-do list for you in the different kind of pillars that you need to enact as part of a regulatory framework. So that's what I am hopeful that we are going to do. So by the end of the year, we're going to produce a report, and that report will contain a bunch of different sections, each section dedicated to a different aspect of artificial intelligence regulation that we think that Congress and the federal government needs to tackle. So I pushed very hard for the task force to be broadly bipartisan. It's customary in the House that we're a majoritarian institution, so whichever party has the majority appoints a chairman and the majority of the members on that committee, and then the minority appoints a ranking member that sits below the chairman and a lesser number of committee members. I wanted our task force to be different, so I pushed very hard for us to have an equal number of members from each side of the aisle. I have not a ranking member, but a co-chairman who is Representative Ted Lieu, also of California, one of the few other computer scientists in Congress. So really happy to have his expertise and his talent and his knowledge working alongside me as we undertake this really monumental task. We've got 12 members from each party on our task force, and from a wide variety of different backgrounds. This is another thing that I pushed hard for. I wanted not just people that had technical expertise, but I wanted people from all different walks of life. And I also wanted people from all the different corners of our political universe, because the last thing that I want to have happen is the task force make a bunch of recommendations and author some legislation, and then we have trouble passing it because there's no one to evangelize it in the broader House of Representatives. So we've got people from the House Freedom Caucus. In fact, I've got two. I specifically asked for that. We've got a member of the squad, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who I'm really happy to have her on the task force. And the expectation is if we can get creative buy-in from all of these different stakeholders, then when we go to evangelize it, we'll have an evangel to send out into each one of these different constituencies and make the case as to why this needs to be done and why our approach is the correct one. So I expect that our approach to AI is not going to be mirroring what the European Union and other countries have done. I'm sure a lot of people know that the EU has been for the last 2 years working on a piece of AI regulation called the AI Act. It's about 3,000 pages long, and it just passed their parliament a couple of months ago, and it's waiting ratification. But it attempts to set a really broad-based regulatory scheme where they preempt the authority to regulate AI away from all of the different sectoral regulators. And they're spinning up a brand new bureaucracy and creating a global licensing requirement where anyone that wants to use AI in the European Union in anything but a low-risk context is going to have to apply for a license and get a license from this agency. They've already had to rewrite that bill, the entire bill, twice, because AI is changing so rapidly. The first time was after the advent of large language models like ChatGPT, and then just last year they had to rewrite it again when it became apparent what an impact generative AI was going to have. We want to avoid that kind of debacle. I think it's impossible to know enough about the long-term consequences of AI right now to do a good job at completely regulating it this year. So I don't think that this is the job for just 1 year, and I don't think it's one 3,000-page bill. I think it's a few smaller bills a year, every year for the next 10 years as we kind of nibble away at this problem. But one of the decisions that we're going to have to make very soon is what the federal government's regulatory approach to AI structure is going to be. Do we follow the lead of the EU and spin up a brand new bureaucracy, or do we empower our existing sectoral regulators to do what they're already doing and regulate AI within their sectoral spaces? And I think that actually makes a lot more sense. And it's particularly evident in the healthcare space. As was mentioned in my introduction, I sit on the Health Subcommittee underneath the Energy and Commerce Committee. And we had a hearing a month ago in which I was really stunned to discover that the FDA has already processed over 500 applications for the use of AI in medical devices. And over 200 of those are already on the shelf. And that's pretty stunning if you think about it, because if you accept that the risk of AI is highly contextual, meaning that something, the behavior, an algorithmic behavior can be very low risk in one context and very risky, unacceptably risky in another context, which I mean, I think is pretty clear. The use of AI in healthcare devices has got to be one of the highest risk uses of AI that there is. And yet the FDA is already having to sort through this issue. And, in talking with the stakeholders in industry and stakeholders in healthcare, it seems like they're doing a very solid job of regulating AI in the healthcare space right now. So, I mean, here's the operative question for us. Is it easier to teach the FDA what it might not already know about AI and give it the tools and resources it needs to expand its regulatory prowess in that area? Or is it easier to teach a brand new bureaucracy everything that the FDA has already learned about ensuring patient safety over the last 100 years? And I think it's pretty clearly the former and not the latter. I think it just makes more sense. And I mean, not to understate the problem, the FDA is going to need help. They're going to need technical personnel and a pool of technical talent. They're going to need a regulatory sandbox to use as a test bed for the testing of potentially malicious AI. They're going to need testing and evaluation standards from organizations like NIST and OSTP. But I think that is a much shallower hill to climb than trying to spin up a brand new bureaucracy and expect them to do a good job regulating AI everywhere. So that's something, a decision that we're going to have to make in the short term. What direction we're going to go on that. But I think we've got pretty broad consensus that our sectoral regulators already do a pretty thorough job, and we just need to give them the tools and the resources and the testing methodologies that they need to be able to expand their efforts into this new space. Another thing that I'm very careful to evangelize when I talk about AI is the fact that because we're chipping away at the problem, just because we're doing it incrementally, does not mean that AI is not going to be regulated. AI is already regulated, as we've just been talking about the FDA. All of our sectoral regulators are already regulating AI within their sectoral spaces. And also, a lot of people are concerned about things like unintended biases in AI. And there have been some very well-documented cases for that. But I always try and remind people that most of the harmful uses of AI are already illegal. For example, we've had a highly publicized case where an AI algorithm used for the screening of resumes ended up exhibiting some racial bias. That was unintentional. It was due to the way that it had been trained and the fact that people hadn't thoroughly thought through the consequences of the training data that they were using. But still, I mean, it needs to be said that it's already illegal to discriminate in hiring on the basis of race. It doesn't matter if you use AI or use another tool, it's illegal. So it's good that we're finding and fixing these unintended biases, but it's not as if we already don't have guardrails around the solutions to these problems. And it's not as if our sectoral regulators aren't already tackling this job. So, I mean, I think it is appropriate that we are very thoughtful and deliberate in our approach to regulating, because, and I'll close with this and open it up to some questions. I am an enormous AI optimist. I think AI has the potential to not only vastly expand human productivity, but also emerge as the best tool for the sharing of human knowledge that mankind has ever invented. And I think it also has the potential to create a new wave of prosperity that will literally lift all the boats and increase the standard of living for every American. To be able to accomplish that goal would require that we get the job of regulating AI right. In other words, we do what we need to do to protect our constituents against the malicious uses of AI and the potential harms of AI, while still enabling the beneficial effects that AI is going to have on a lot of different aspects of our economy. And I am hopeful that with the help of my colleagues on the task force, we will be successful in setting up a framework that does exactly that. So that's the task we're embarking on. Happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you, Congressman. I think it's truly a privilege that we have you representing us in Congress on this aspect, especially with your expertise. In terms of trying to hone it a little bit more, what do you feel are the best and worst aspects for physicians and healthcare and for patients that will result from the use of artificial intelligence?
I think it's a good question. I think that the effects, especially the healthcare field, are almost universally positive. And let me defend that. If you are a physician, it has the potential to automate a lot of the most tedious parts of running a medical practice. So I'm astonished at how much bandwidth we waste in the interface between the patient care and dealing with reimbursement from insurance companies and from the government. I mean, we waste an incredible amount of capital and productivity there. AI has the potential to vastly reduce that and automate it. It also has the potential to vastly improve the quality of the healthcare that we are providing through a variety of different tools. We've already talked about things like we were talking about AI and medical devices, but we're talking about diagnostic tools, the reading of X-rays and CT scans, the reading of test results, the aggregation of medical knowledge in ways that make diagnosis really much more informed. These are all really positive things. And then, I mean, the emergence of genetic drugs and genetic treatments that are specifically genetically engineered to match the patient. I mean, it's just incredible things. When I talk to physicians about what their fears are, everyone deep down fears being replaced by a machine. And I think it's not unreasonable for us to have that fear, but it's not realistic to worry that AI is going to actually do that. And let me give you an example. Radiologists are probably the group of medical practitioners that are panicking the most right now, because that's kind of been the low-hanging fruit for AI. We're using new AI algorithms to automate the detection of tumors and CT scans, for example, tuberculosis and X-rays. And the radiologists are concerned that this is going to result in fewer jobs for radiologists. But I think that putting this in practice is revealing that the opposite is actually true. This is going to greatly increase the demands for radiologists, because no one is going to want to get a diagnosis of cancer based on a CT scan without the intervention of a trained radiologist. We will never have it the case where a machine on its own is going to be allowed to do that, or even do things like prescribing drugs, right? Making a medical diagnosis on a patient. That's something that physicians, and only physicians, human physicians, can do. But they can do it more effectively through the use of AI. So, for example, with radiologists, it's already driving down the cost of things like CT scans and reading X-rays to the point where we're using those much more frequently as a diagnostic tool. So even if you've got AI that does an initial pass at reading the test, it's still going to require a lot more radiologists to be able to back up the machines and be able to provide the human component of this. So I mean, I think that's an indication of what's to come. And you look at, I know I'm preaching to the choir here. We could do so much better a job providing quality medical care to Americans if we had a more pervasive infrastructure for providing that service. We've got far too many Americans that don't see their physician on a yearly basis. We have far too many Americans with very treatable conditions like high blood pressure and diabetes that don't treat their conditions. AI is going to help us with that. I mean, can you imagine if you've got your little personal assistant and it's bugging you every day that you really need to schedule that colonoscopy, I mean, it's going to be amazing. So I'm an optimist as far as that it's going to be disruptive. No one pretends it's not going to be disruptive, but I think that disruption can be in a much more positive way than a negative way.
I think, you remind me of Dr. Hansen. I want to echo his sentiment. We have a San Bernardino County Medical Society subcommittee on AI that we started as well. And he prefers to use the term augmented intelligence in healthcare as opposed to artificial intelligence. It's more to augment, the physician's practice and not to replace it.
I would agree.
How do you see AI, as far as assisting physicians? How will it be able to alleviate some of the regulatory burdens for physicians?
Well, we've mentioned a few of them already. Just the sheer the volume of paperwork, all of the administration that goes into a medical practice that is completely aside from actually providing medical care to people. It has the potential to make all of that much, much more efficient. And I think that not only physicians, but our patients are going to see the benefit of that. And then in a larger sense, or the ones, a couple other contexts we've talked about, it's going to greatly accelerate the dissemination of knowledge. And I think that's going to make diagnosis a lot easier. We're going to have a more of a wealth of information at our fingertips when we make decisions. And I think that that's going to be a good thing.
Some of the physicians have raised concerns about the lack of transparency, bias, and privacy because we're unable to access the data used for training these AI models. What are your views on these concerns?
So we had a little bit of a talk about bias a few minutes ago, but let's have a deeper conversation about bias, because when people use the word bias is kind of a human word. When you talk about artificial intelligence, we mention bias as if it has a negative connotation, but really machine learning is all about bias. What you're doing, I mean, like say we're going to take a machine learning algorithm and train it to detect tuberculosis in an X-ray, right? That's a useful thing to be able to do. What we're really asking it for is to be biased, right? We're going to feed it a lot of a set of training data, and then we're going to ask it to generalize what it learns from that training data, to differentiate between X-rays that have tuberculosis in them, X-rays that don't. And I mean, that's as much of a bias as the biases that we have that we speak of negatively, right? But there are some biases we think are helpful and some biases that we don't. But it's really, really important that we get the training data sets right. And there's a famous example of the case that I just raised. A company attempted to do what I just articulated and create an algorithm to detect tuberculosis in lung X-rays. So their training data set was thousands of X-rays that were positive for TB, thousands of X-rays that were negative, and they used these to train the algorithm. They tested it on the training data, and it was highly successful in classifying the X-rays into those that had tuberculosis present and those that didn't. And then they did a clinical trial, and it was terrible. It was a complete failure, didn't work at all. And so after that, they did a postmortem to figure out, well, why did this algorithm not work? We invested a lot of money in this. And here's what they found. Most of the X-rays in the training data that were positive for tuberculosis were taken in third world countries where most of the X-ray equipment was older, because that's where the tuberculosis is in those countries. Most of the X-rays that were negative for TB came from more developed countries, and they just happened to be using newer X-ray equipment. So inadvertently, what the company had succeeded in doing is creating an algorithm to detect the age of an X-ray machine. You see what I'm saying? So I mean, they had created this unintentional bias in this algorithm, but the algorithm was just doing what it was trained to do. So this was not a machine failure. This was not an AI failure. This was a human failure, a failure to properly engineer the training data set. So, I mean, I think when we start looking at the problem that way, you can see that it's a solvable problem. We just need to do a better job at defining what we mean when we say a bias that's undesirable, and we need to do a better job at engineering the training data to make sure it doesn't exhibit the biases that we think are undesirable.
Do you feel the cost of integrating AI into the current data frameworks for physicians will be manageable, or will this create hindrances or reinforce a tiered system of healthcare?
That's a good question. I am an optimist. I think it's not going to be without cost, but I think that like any new technology, the more it's adopted, the more costs will be driven down. The number one thing that is going to catalyze that is to make sure that we have free and open markets for AI. And as long as we can do that, we will prevent monopolies from occurring that create monopolistic behaviors that keep those costs artificially high. The reason why I'm so confident about this is that once you've developed AI, the incremental cost of deploying it is incredibly low. So it might be very expensive to develop it, but each incremental use is almost free. So it just costs a little bit of compute, a little bit of computer time, a little bit of energy, and that's it. So that is a market that is begging for price competition. So once a company has developed something, if the incremental cost is zero and another company has a competing product also with an incremental price close to zero, you can guarantee that in an effort to gain market share, both of those companies are going to drive their costs pretty down close to the incremental cost of providing those services. So that's one of the things that I think we in federal government have a very important obligation to do, is to make sure that we don't get market domination by one company. And this is a serious concern because the cost of developing something like a large language model are staggering.
Yeah.
It's estimated that ChatGPT 4 cost $100 million to train. And that's just the delta over ChatGPT 3.5. It's also estimated that the next generation of large language models will be about 10 times more expensive than that. In other words, about $1 billion of training costs. So you can imagine when that amount of capital is required, that really limits the number of firms that are going to be providing them. And we want to make sure that we get a robust marketplace with lots of different competing companies to do that. And so I've got some ideas on how to do that. I won't go in. I know that we're talking about medical care and not AI itself. So I won't go into detail there, but it's something that the task force is very focused on.
And how do we properly regulate actions that result in medical injuries and errors from AI system mistakes? You mentioned that case earlier, along with the liability for negative outcomes and the ethical and social implications of these AI decisions.
Well, we've got some work to do on figuring out how to parcel out liability. I wonder at some point, and don't get your hopes up, I don't think this is happening at the same time as our regulation of AI, but we have a problem in the United States, and I'll get on my political soapbox here for just a second. We have a problem where we have come to believe that anything when anything bad happens to anyone, someone else is to blame. So we get personal injury lawyers who get in a courtroom and they get a jury to parcel out blame. And they are really looking for the deep pockets, although they're not telling the jurors that, right? So they'll get a car accident and they'll say, and the other driver was definitely at fault. He ran a red light, he ran into the side of this car and caused severe injury to the driver. So obviously, he gets 60% of the blame, but also the light, timing could have been more generous. And so, maybe the city gets 20% of the blame, and the car, they'll go, down into the details, and the car, met all the safety standards and the safety systems performed as designed, but maybe that there was a way that the car manufacturer could have designed a safety system to be a little bit more effective, even though that would have added costs to the car. And so they wind up assigning 5% to the car manufacturer, and the jury doesn't think anything of this, but the that's what the injury attorneys want to hear, because they're going to go after the car manufacturer because that's where the money is, right? And this is the society that we've engineered. And I really, one of these days, I'm going to author what I call the shit happens law. That says, that's a wrong-headed way of looking at it. Just because something bad happened doesn't mean someone else is to blame and you have a claim to pursue against them. And I think we'd be in a healthier place in our society if we looked at it that way. But you guys are sweet for listening. The point is, though, how are we going to parcel this liability with respect to AI? Is it, who is liable? Is it the developer of the original AI algorithm? Is it the deployer who trained the algorithm in a specific domain? Is it the company that licensed the AI for use in their day-to-day business? Is it the person that provided the training data? Unfortunately, we've got a legal system for dealing with that, and they're going to latch onto this, and they're going to have to figure it out. We've got some serious legal problems to solve with respect to AI, but they're mostly intellectual property issues around like, can copyrighted material be used to train AI algorithms without the permission of the copyright holder? If that occurs, is the result a derivative work of the copyrighted material? When generative AI is used, is that to produce new content? Is that content copyrightable? And then if so, who owns the copyright for that material? Is it the person that engineered the prompt? Is it the person who wrote the algorithm? Or is it the person that provided the original training data? So, all of these are really consequential things we're gonna have to work through. The legal liability, we already have a framework that, while not perfect, is probably going to be workable.
Thank you, Congressman. I think your insight thus far has been truly invaluable. We now have a couple of minutes to take some questions from the chat function on Zoom. Allison?
Congressman,
Yes.
this is,
We're going to go ahead and start with the chat feature, whoever that was speaking. Okay. All right, we're going to start. We've had some requests from the Congressman's policy staff to start with Dr. Dev Ganadev's question, which is the federal government funding any research on AI so that China will not control the technology?
Yes, great question. Yes, the federal government has been funding AI research for 50 years. One of the committees I sit on is the Committee for Science, Space, and Technology. We oversee the nation's research budget, the National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy research laboratories, and components of DARPA. So we have had an active interest in AI research. There are also a lot of military applications for AI, and not just offensive, but it turns out the best defense against the offensive use of AI is the defensive use of AI. And so, without going into detail that I can't go into, the Department of Defense has been actively engaged in AI research for many years. Having said that, I don't want to underestimate to understate the challenge that China poses us. In 2017, China issued themselves kind of an Apollo moon landing-like challenge, which was to become, by the year 2030, the world's leader in AI. And they are devoting vast amounts of resource, both in terms of money and in terms of manpower, to accomplishing that goal. And they are well along. They have more than half of the world's advanced AI companies are located in China. China, 2 years ago, passed the United States in the number of PhDs it was awarding in computer science. This year, they will award over double the number of PhDs in computer science that we do. So we've got some catching up to do, but we have some structural advantages too. It's difficult. They have a society that's regimented. It's difficult to be creative within. So we have that advantage. We also have the advantage that we are developing AI to, among other things, transform our economy. And whereas they develop AI to empower a surveillance state. And from a commercial standpoint, they've enacted some of the strictest regulations against the use of AI in the marketplace of any country in the world. So I'm optimistic that we will continue to lead the world in AI, but it won't come without some serious effort on our part.
All right, thank you so much. All right, now we're going to jump back up to the top, and we want to encourage everybody to please get your questions in the chat feature here, because we have about 8 minutes left. All right, Dr. Shanthar Pai and Dr. Ravneet Mann have similar questions. How many from healthcare are on the task force? And the second question is, is there leadership from other disciplines, nurses, respiratory therapists, et cetera, on the task force? So that's kind of a combined question.
Interesting. So the task force, our first meeting is next week. So we really haven't gotten to know each other yet. So I'll just go on what I already know. We intentionally structured the task force membership to be representative of the committees of jurisdiction for the legislation we're going to create. And let me take a minute and tell you what that means. So I intentionally asked for the task force to be a task force instead of a select committee. If we were a select committee, we would have hearings and markups in which we voted on legislation. As a task force, we will author legislation. Hopefully, most of our task force members will be co-sponsors of our legislation, but then the legislation will go through the normal legislative process. And that was important to me because the last thing that I want is to get into jurisdictional fights with existing policy committees over where legislation goes. You know, I don't want to be fighting with Energy and Commerce about health-related legislation. I don't want to be fighting with financial services about identity-related legislation. I don't want to be fighting with judiciary around intellectual property legislation. So we asked for representative members from each committee to be part of our task force. So that's the way we tried to spread it out, is to get a couple of members from, and I'm, of course, I sit on the health subcommittee and I'm the chairman. So you know, we're covered there. But we specifically asked for members from science, space, and technology, from energy, commerce, from financial services, transportation, infrastructure, House oversight. We've got all representatives from all of those committees there, House intelligence as well. In terms of like from walks of life, I don't know. Ask me after next week, and I'll probably have a better answer.
Okay, thank you so much. From Dr. Eric Hansen, and you've kind of addressed some of this, but what is your biggest worry on the potential abuse or risk with the use of AI in healthcare specifically?
Well, you added in healthcare at the end there, but I'm going to generalize it because I don't think the answer is different for in healthcare than kind of globally. My biggest concern about the use of AI is the potential for the use of AI to spread mis and disinformation. We are already having a problem with that with social media, obviously. It's a fight that we've been having now for the last 10 years. But the fight really started with the 24-hour news cycle and the end of the era of Dan Rather, right, where you could agree with him or disagree with him, but you could be pretty sure everything that he said was vetted, right? To the era where now I'm sure many of my constituents get their news from Mr. Beast on TikTok, right? So, you know, this is a problem. So AI is going to just accelerate this tendency, and we are going to have to figure out what to do about that. And I could give you an hour-long talk on my thoughts about that, but I think that is the #1 problem that we're going to have to solve. And it's going to be because of the power of AI, it's going to be much more difficult. You know, think about the fact that 10 years from now, you will probably be able to type into a prompt, you know, the way that you can with Gemini now, but it's a little clunkier, but you'll probably be able to say, make me a video of a CNN broadcast where the existing anchors are discussing how Congressman Obernolte got arrested for robbing a 7-Eleven last night, complete with security camera footage. And in the time it takes you to type that, you will have it there. Okay, so think about the potential there for mischief, right? So we are going to all have to shift our thinking to one where we cherish authenticity. And we're going to have to make it very clear what content is authentic and what content might be generated. Yeah. Unfortunately, you can't just require that generated content be labeled, because then you're going to run into the same problem we run in with counterfeit currency. I mean, if we could solve this problem with counterfeit currency, we just pass a law that said all counterfeit currency has to have a stamp that says fake on it, right? The problem solved. What could go wrong? But the problem is obviously that the malicious actors aren't going to follow that law. And the same thing will happen with artificially generated content that is really intended to be deceptive. So I think it's the solution is going to revolve around the proof of provenance, the proof of authenticity. The fact that when I put out something, when I send you an email, it'll have my digital encrypted fingerprint on it. I mean, fingerprint not being literal, but figurative, so that it's from me and it hasn't been altered. And I think that that's the way that we're going to solve that problem. But it's going to require a shift in thinking and a lot of generational education to make that happen.
All right. Thank you so much. Dr. Shan Pai, what do you think about Google AI?
Specifically?
Yes,
You know,
apparently.
there's Google has done some good work. In a way, they're a little bit behind, but it's kind of because of their philosophy. But I think everyone's got a different approach. Let me take the opportunity to say something that I think is important. A lot of people, when they think about the potential long-term negative consequences of AI, what they're really thinking of is a view that's been honed by 50 years of pop culture, an army of evil robots rising up to take over the world. That's what really people think what's the worst thing that can happen, right? And although I think AI has some pretty existential negative potential, that's not what keeps me up at night is, evil robots. So we've kind of got some re-education to do. All of that, something out of the Skynet out of the Terminator or HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey, that's what we would call examples of artificial general intelligence, AGI. Something that is as smart as a human. So if you look at the literature and you talk to technologists, opinions vary very widely over how close we are to achieving AGI. Some people think we're only a couple years away. I am not in that camp. I think we're nowhere close to AGI, and I think that the track that we're on with large language models is an academic dead end. I don't think we're going to get there through large language models. Large language models are just basically parroting the information that they're trained on. There's no real understanding there of what it is they're saying, and there's no planning function, higher level organization of that information. So I don't think that that's a realistic, that's a realistic fear. So everyone, Google included, has a different approach that they're taking towards trying to get to AGI, and I'm a fan. Let's experiment, but I don't think we're close.
Okay. Are you about out of time, Congressman, or do you have any more
Going
time?
for a little bit. I don't want people to have unanswered questions here, so let's keep rolling for another few minutes.
Okay, awesome. Christopher Snyder asks, any plans to reskill or train us currently in healthcare?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that that's something that is the government's responsibility, right? I think that everyone is going to have to be reskilled. But I'm an optimist about this. I think that we're going to need to do a better job at training our young people, because they're going to need to know how to succeed in a workforce that requires knowledge of how to use AI to improve your productivity, and that knowledge is going to be different for every different field. Certainly, physicians are going to have to be skilled in the use of AI tools to be able to enhance their ability to provide quality healthcare. But I don't have any doubts that industry isn't going to step in and fill that gap. And they're going to do it in a way that's much better than government could do. They'll do it in a way that speaks the language of each individual profession, including physicians. So if you're one that's nervous about this, I would say don't be nervous about it. The solutions will come. And if you're really curious about it, you can get a free subscription through OpenAI to ChatGPT, and go play with it. See what it can do. So spend a few minutes with it. Typing in different prompts and figuring out what its capabilities are. And I think you'll have a much better understanding of what AI actually does.
Okay, great. Next question, there are two quite related questions, so we'll combine them. Dr. Donaldo Hernandez asks, how do we expand infrastructure such that the potential benefits of AI are available to all? And an addendum to that from Dr. Michael Secura is concerned that small medical practices in rural areas may not have the same opportunities to take advantage of AI. So
You know
how do
what?
you feel about that?
This is a concern that gets voiced a lot. And I actually think that the reality will be the opposite. And let me defend that. In fact, I just gave a talk on AI with one of my task force members, Bill Foster, last night. Bill is a particle physicist. He might be the only particle physicist in Congress. I wouldn't be surprised at all. But a very smart guy, has done some deep thinking. And he and I have been good friends for years. And he used the word last night that I hadn't heard before, but I really like it. AI is going to lead to an explosion of the democratization of expertise. So, you know, we talked about the fact that AI is going to be the greatest tool for the dissemination of knowledge that we've invented yet. And that means that people that now have to pay lots of money for experts on a certain subject are going to be able to get that same expertise much less expensively. And that's going to lead to an incredible empowerment of the middle class. You know, similar to what happened in the Industrial Revolution, where there were things that were only available to wealthy people that by the end of the Industrial Revolution were available to anyone. You know, and imagine a world where being wealthy didn't mean that you got better healthcare than someone who was just in the middle class. That's incredible. You know, I think if that's all that we accomplished with AI, it would be a huge win. So this is going to drive down costs for everyone. So I'm not worried about unequal spread of benefits, because I think it's going to be the opposite. I think it's going to empower the little people. It's going to empower small businesses, because all of a sudden you won't have to have an investment of millions of dollars in new tools to be able to get access to this new technology. And we were talking about a few minutes ago, the incremental cost of providing this service is so close to zero that I think as long as there's a free and open marketplace, you'll see those costs get driven down. So I actually think it's going to be the opposite. I think it's going to be hugely empowering to the middle class and to small practices and small businesses.
Okay, great. Thank you. You've sort of addressed this, but here, let's ask from Dr. Rodney Borger, how are bias and accuracy going to be regulated and held accountable? Do you have any additional thoughts on that?
So we were talking about contextual risks a few minutes ago, and I think it's very important to have that conversation when we talk about accuracy and regulation, because if you look at the last year, the National Institute for Science and Technology Standards, we call it NIST, they came out with a risk management framework for AI. And one of the main things that came out of that framework is this realization that when we use the word risk, you have to pair it with a context. You can't assess the risk of something outside of a context, because you can't define what potential negative outcomes could result in the misuse of AI. And that's when we say, you know, a lack of accuracy, we're really talking about you know, bad outcomes. So the reason why it's important to have that discussion is because at some point we've got to define, make a technical definition for human words like accuracy. You know, what do we mean when we say accurate? What do we mean when we say human-centric? It's been said, if you look at last year, the Senate came out with what they called a framework for AI regulation. And I thought it wasn't very helpful, because it was just a bunch of buzzwords flying in close formation. They said AI should be safe. You know, AI should be, you can say accurate. AI should be explainable. AI should be transparent. Well, that's great. You know, we can all agree. We can all, you know, nod our heads and agree that AI should be all of those things. But the rubber meets the road when you actually try and define what you mean when you say it should be safe and transparent and human-centered. So, and that meaning has to depend on the context. That's why I think that our sectoral regulators will have a different answer to that question depending on the context in which it's used. And, you know, accuracy in the context of a medical device is going to mean something very different than accuracy in the context of a video game, right? And so I think that we're going to use the expertise that we've accumulated through 100 years of regulating the medical space already to define what that means in each case.
All right, thank you. Stephen Hardacre asks, what are the greatest opportunities for AI to aid in healthcare delivery by reducing costs and increasing positive patient outcomes?
Yeah, we had this conversation. You probably typed that in before we got
Yeah.
into it. But those are the two things, right? Reducing costs and improving patient outcomes. And we talked about a bunch of the ways that can happen. The democratization of expertise, the dissemination of knowledge, the reduction of overhead, but I mean also things like new technologies. The AI has been already incredibly useful for things like protein folding. Whereas it might take a man year to develop a technique for folding a given protein. And now AI can develop 1,000 of those a day. And so instead of figuring out what protein you need and then spending a year figuring out how to mass produce it, you can experiment with 1,000 different proteins and figure out what protein works. So this is going to have an incredibly beneficial impact on the development of new drugs, the development of new therapies. It's in ways that aren't even obvious to us right now. So when it comes down to improvement of the patient outcomes, I think there's a huge upside for us.
Right. Okay. You have time for one more, maybe?
Right. Sure.
Okay. This one's from Elizabeth McNeil, your friend Elizabeth McNeil. The United Healthcare cyber attack has tied up the entire healthcare system in the country, including physicians who have not been paid for weeks. This event screams for Congress to do more about market consolidation. How do we protect healthcare from 1-2 AI players? I know you mentioned this. Do you have more specifics?
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with that. That's kind of an issue outside of AI, but this is an illustration of a huge problem we have with healthcare in the United States. And I'll say it very, very nakedly. I don't think we have actual functional healthcare markets in the United States. We have gone so far down the road of government and insurance company control over healthcare that we don't have a functional marketplace. And so you really don't have any of the benefits that open markets bring to any kind of human endeavor. So, and this is what the problem that was mentioned is a perfect illustration of what happens when you don't have free markets. You get to the point where you can have monopolistic behavior, and at the end of the day, you've got the middlemen, that are not as focused on, I mean, they can say whatever they want, but we all know that, first and foremost, they're focused on the bottom line, not focused on improving patient healthcare outcomes. And that, unfortunately, they suck up resources away from the folks that are on the front lines actually providing the healthcare. So, so many of the debates and the conflicts that we have in the Health Subcommittee revolve around this problem. And I can tell you, it's incredibly frustrating for me to see, because at the end of the day, I mean, the United States, I think, has the best healthcare system in the world. We certainly have the best healthcare providers in the world, but many times we are hampering their ability to improve the quality of the care that they give because of the system that we've imposed on them. And that's incredibly frustrating.
I think we have one final question from Dr. Padmini. As end users, how we as physicians will be involved in the process of integrating AI into healthcare? I.e., will there be a requirement for physicians to be in the system-making process of these AI integrations into healthcare?
God forbid. I don't see AI as something that we would require people to do, and I hope it never gets to that point. I see AI as something that providers seek out because it enables us to do a better job and a more efficient job at providing healthcare to the patients that we serve, is the way that I look at it. So I actually think that it's going to be kind of a collaborative process. And one of the things that makes me optimistic about the field of healthcare is that it's already changing so rapidly in good ways that we all have to be students of lifelong learning. I don't think anyone thinks you can go to medical school, acquire a medical education, and then go through a whole career of service in providing healthcare to patients without learning anything new. I mean, we all know that we have to be constantly on the lookout for new informations. What new discoveries are in this field? How could I've got a patient with this diagnosis? Who else has got patients like that? What's worked in their case? Is there a new genetic therapy for that? Is there a new drug for that? Is there a pilot program for that? We're all constantly trying to seek out that new knowledge. And so that gives me a lot of optimism, because AI is going to be another tool in the toolbox for that. And I think that physicians are going to naturally seek it when they realize how much it can improve the quality of the care that they provide.
All right, we have a question from Kathleen Stillwell. Physicians are concerned about the impact of AI in a medical malpractice case. What expert will ever opine that AI is the standard of care?
Sure. Yep. We're nowhere close to that, fortunately. There may come a time at which someone says it's malpractice because you didn't use AI, I think is, the crux of the argument there. But I mean, that's, we're talking a long ways in the future. If we ever get there, I actually think it might be a good thing, because it might be the quality of the care that we provide is increased by so much that not using this powerful tool, it would be considered malpractice. That's actually a sign of success. So, let's hope we're so lucky. But yeah, there's no need to worry about that anytime soon.
All right. Patrick Tellez asks or comments, it would be useful for regulations to encourage ongoing research on AI use in healthcare, especially as applied to medical decision-making and accommodating protections of PHI, population health, in ways that still allow for population health management and much-needed interoperability.
Okay, well, you're using technical terms that, not being a physician, I don't know, so I can't comment on AI and whatever PHI, population health.
Okay, no problem.
I don't know what that means, but I will tell you that NIH, among other entities, has already invested many millions of dollars in researching the beneficial uses of AI in the healthcare space. So this is not something that we're going into blind, right? This is something that is an active topic of research. And so, I'm sure that any decisions that get made are going to be informed decisions. And that's one of the reasons why, actually, I think some caution is warranted. I don't want to rush in and pretend that we have all of the information that we need right now to instantly figure out what the structure of AI regulation will be for the next 20 years. I think that's a fool's errand. I think that we have to, as I say, pick the low-hanging fruit. We have to focus on the issues that we know we have enough knowledge about to do a good job at establishing regulatory frameworks for now. And then the medium-term and long-term harms, we've got a little bit more runway on those. So we can wait a little bit and be a little bit more deliberate and thoughtful about them. And I think that's okay.
Wonderful. And I have to apologize. PHI is personal health information, not population health. So I got it wrong too,
Good.
Congressman.
Well, interesting. Okay, when you say personal health information, now we're having a different conversation, right?
Yeah.
Because this has been something we have been really debating as a potential negative consequence of AI, is the ability of AI to take disaggregated data and put it back together and de-anonymize it. AI is really good at that. And so the question has been asked, what do we do about sensitive information like personal health information, right? And we are actively engaged in that discussion right now because it's something that I personally am very worried about.
All right.
I think our time is up for today. We want to thank you so much, Congressman, for joining us and helping us understand the future of AI in healthcare. We hope that we can continue to have these webinars with you and get updates. And I want to echo the sentiment of my colleagues in the chat that we are truly grateful for you supporting and your unwavering support of physicians in healthcare. And we think you're truly an asset to our area, our state, and our nation. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely. It was great to see everyone again, if only virtually, and want to wish everyone a nice weekend and look forward to seeing you again in person.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman.
And each of you will be receiving a link to the recording today from the San Bernardino County Medical Society staff. Please feel free to reach out to us anytime for follow-up or assistance, or visit us at sbcms.org. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.